All right, so today we are starting with Shrimad Bhagavatam, Skandha 6, Discourse 14, which is entitled The Lament of Chitraketu. So this is following directly after last week. We read about the demon Vritra and his war against Indra. And in that, Vritra revealed some surprising spiritual insights for a demon. And that leads directly into Parikshit's next question. Parikshit submitted, how did unflinching devotion to the almighty Narayana appear in the heart of the sinful Vritra, whose nature, O holy Brahmana, was predominated by Rajas and Tamas? Devoted to the feet of the bestower of liberation, devotion to the feet of the bestower of liberation does not ordinarily develop in the heart of even devas, whose intellect is pure, and sages, whose mind is untainted by sin. Living beings in this universe are as numerous as there are particles of dust. Of them, only a few human creatures and other beings, as a matter of fact, practice virtue. Of them, seekers of liberation, or of those who practice virtue, seekers of liberation are ordinarily only few, O jewel among the Brahmanas. And among the thousands of those seeking moksha, scarce one is completely rid of attachment and attains success. Even among tens of millions of those who have been rid of identification with the body, etc., and even realized the self, he whose mind is perfectly serene, entirely free from the craving for sense gratification, and solely devoted to Lord Narayana is most difficult to find. How then did the sinful Vritra, the tormentor of all the worlds, who gratified by his valor on the battlefield even the thousand-eyed Lord of Paradise, that being, of course, Indra, remain so steadfast in devotion to the Lord, the attractor of all, in the midst of a fierce combat? Great is our doubt in this matter, and so is our eagerness to hear about it, O Master. Parikshit here is, in saying our doubt, either using the royal we, or assuming that all the other people who were there listening to Shuka also wonder about this. Sutta continued. So remember, Sutta is narrating, Shuka narrating to Parikshit. Sutta continued, the glorious Shuka, son of Badarayana, welcomed the relevant inquiry of the devout king Parikshit when he heard it, and then made the following reply. Sri Shuka said, hear attentively, O king, the following legend, as heard by me from the mouth of my father, the sage Vedavyasa, who was born on an island, as well as from the sages Narada and Devala. In the Shurasena country, the tract lying about the city of Mathura, so the tradition goes, there was a king called by the name of Chitraketu, O Parikshit, who ruled over the entire globe and to whom the earth yielded everything sought after by him. Radha, this is chapter 14 in book 6, if anyone was asking for that. He had 1 crore wives, but though capable of procreation, the emperor got no issue by them. Anxiety now laid hold of Chitraketu, who, though endowed with beauty, generosity, youth, noble lineage, learning, sovereignty, imperial fortune, and all other virtues, was the husband of barren ladies. One might suspect that if he had 1 crore wives, then more likely he was the barren one. All his riches, fair-eyed queens, and this earth did not prove a source of delight to that ruler of the entire globe. Ranging through these worlds, however, the glorious sage Angira, on one occasion, came to his house by chance. Having honored him with due ceremony by rising to greet him and offering him articles of worship, etc., the emperor sat with a collected mind near the sage, who was now comfortably seated, having been entertained as a guest. The great sage, O emperor, showed every courtesy and consideration in return to Chitraketu, who sat close to him on the ground, bent low with modesty, and, calling his attention, spoke the following words. Angira said, is everything well with your person, as well as with your prakritis? To refer to the prakritis of a head of state is a traditional list of the constituent elements of a state, which are the high priest, the chief minister, the territories, the people, the fortresses, the treasury, the police, and the army, as well as the allies. So that's what's referenced by as everything well with your prakritis. And are you enjoying a sound health, you as well as your prakritis? As a jiva is protected by the 7 material sheaths, those referring to Mahatattva, the ego, and the 5 subtle elements, so the king too is protected by the 7 constituent elements. A king can enjoy the blessings of sovereignty by actually placing himself under the control of his prakritis. So by following the advice of those people, the priest, the minister, his people, etc. The prakritis are likewise enriched by the king, O ruler of men. Are your wives, subjects, ministers, servants, people following particular trades, counselors, citizens, and inhabitants of the other parts of your state, tributary chiefs, and offspring, obedient to your will? All these follow the will of the man whose mind is under his own control. All the worlds, along with their guardian deities, dutifully offer tribute to him. It seems to me that your mind is not pleased, either with others or with your own self, for I find your face discolored with anxiety, and conclude that you have not attained the object of your desire. Subjected thus, O Parikshit, to various presumptions by the sage, even though the latter knew everything by intuition, Chitraketu, who was full of longing for a son and was bent low with modesty, thereupon replied to the sage. Chitraketu submitted, O worshipful sage, what is there without or within embodied beings which is not known to yogis, whose sins have been wiped out through asceticism, spiritual enlightenment, and deep concentration of mind? Yet, prompted by your command, I should speak out, O holy Brahmana, the thought in my mind to you, who ask me about it even though you know it. The sovereignty of the entire globe and the power and affluence attending it, which are worthy of being coveted even by the guardians of the spheres, bring no delight to me, issueless as I am, just as other things do not rejoice him who longs for food and drink under pressure of hunger and thirst. Therefore protect me, O highly blessed one, and do that for us, whereby we may be able, with the help of a son, to get out of the dark abyss of hell, which is an old saying, putting it rather extremely, of what it is like to die childless in Vedic society, which has been reached by us along with our forefathers and which is so difficult to cross over. Sri Shuka continued, implored thus, that glorious, merciful, and mighty son of Brahma, since it's the Bhagavatam here assumes that you remember that Angira is a direct son of Brahma, one of the Prajapatis, got a special oblation prepared for being offered to the god Tvashta, and propitiated the said god with the same. The Brahmana further gave the remainder of the sacrificial offering to the queen known by the name of Kritadyuti, who was the eldest and the foremost of all the king's spouses, O descendant of Bharata. The sage, Brahma's son, then said to the ruler of men, O king, a son who will be the source of joy and grief to you will be born to you, and left. Merely by eating the remainder of that sacrificial oblation, even Kritadyuti conceived a child through Chitraketu, just as the goddess Kritaka conceived a son through the god of fire. That refers to a whole long story about leading up to the birth of the god Skanda or Kartikeya, but we don't have to get into that here. The embryo in the womb of that lady, which owed its existence to the ruler of the Shurasena territory, Chitraketu, gradually developed from day to day as the moon, O king, waxes during the bright fortnight. Now, when the time came, a son was duly born, causing supreme delight to the inhabitants of the Shurasena territory who heard of it. The king, who felt delighted, took his bath and, thus purified, adorned himself with ornaments. Then, getting the Brahmanas to pronounce benedictions on the baby, he caused the rite called Jata Karma to be performed. This is Jata Karma Sanskara, the ceremony of touching a newborn baby's tongue 3 times with ghee after appropriate prayers for the purification of the child. To the Brahmanas, he gifted gold and silver, clothes and ornaments, and villages, horses and elephants, and 60 million cows. Like a rain cloud sending down showers according to the will of the people, the generous king gratified the desire of other men by making gifts calculated to bring riches, glory, and longevity to the baby. The affection of the father, the Raja Rishi Chitraketu, for his son, who had been got after great hardship, constantly grew from day to day, like the love of a pauper for his hard-earned money. The attachment of the mother to her son, however, grew to an excessive degree, caused as it was by infatuation, while agony in the shape of longing for a son appeared in the heart of the co-wives of Queen Kritadyuti. Even as Chitraketu fondled the baby every day, no such type of excessive fondness appeared in his heart for his other wives, as he developed for the one who was blessed with a son. Reproaching themselves through jealousy, they felt agonized due to the grief caused by issuelessness and the indifference shown to them by the king, their husband. Fie upon the accursed woman without a child, is the kind of thoughts that they were having. Not esteemed at home by her husband and insulted like a maidservant by her co-wives blessed with good children. What agony can be the lot of maidservants constantly honored because of their service rendered to the master? We wretched women are no better than the maidservant of a maidservant. In this way, there sprang up a feeling of bitter hatred in the heart of those queens whose life was neglected by the king and who were fully burning with jealousy at the fortune of their co-wife in the shape of a son. Cruel-hearted ladies who had lost their good sense through deep malice and were full of resentment towards the king, administered poison to the baby. Queen Kritadyuti, who had no idea of the grievous misdeed of her co-wives, thought on looking at it that the baby was asleep and went about in the palace. Perceiving that the baby had been sleeping too long, the wise queen commanded the nurse who suckled the child with the following words, "Bring me the baby, O good woman." When she went near the baby lying in bed and found that the pupils of its eyes had turned upwards, and that life, the senses, and other faculties, and the soul had quitted it, she cried, "I am finished," and dropped on the ground. Hearing at that time the most painful cry of the nurse, who was violently beating her breast too with both hands, the queen quickly entered into the presence of her child and found her infant son a victim of sudden death. Due to excessive grief, she fainted and fell on the ground, her hair flung about and garments thrown out of order. Hearing the wail, the inmates of the royal gymnasium, both men and women, therefore came and, sharing the queen's grief and therefore much distressed, fell to weeping. Even the queens who had perpetrated the crime shed crocodile tears. Hearing that his son had died, though the cause of his death was unknown, the king lost his vision through grief intensified beyond measure by uninterrupted love. This refers to lost his inner vision, not literally went blind. Followed by his ministers and other people and surrounded by the Brahmana priests, he came stumbling and falling on the way and sighing deeply, dropped unconscious near the feet of the dead child, his hair disheveled and clothes thrown about in disorder, and his throat choked due to obstruction caused by tears he could not utter a word. Seeing her husband overwhelmed with excessive grief and the infant son, her only progeny, dead, the virtuous queen then wailed in various ways, enhancing the heartache of the people as well as of the ministers and others present there. Bathing her breasts, painted with saffron and sandal paste, with the drops of her tears mixed with collyrium, and throwing about her hair with the flowers dropping from them, she mourned her child like a female osprey in loud and diverse tones, saying things such as, "Alas, O Creator, you are extremely foolish in that you act contrary to your own creation. Oh, the death of a youngster while an elder is living points to this. If you are the reverse," meaning someone doing this deliberately, "you are our constant enemy. If there is no regularity in this world in the matter of death and birth of embodied beings, then let everything happen according to their karma. You are cutting asunder this cord of affection which was produced by yourself for the growth of your creation. And you, dear child, ought not to forsake me, a wretched and helpless woman. Look at your father burning with grief. With you, we could easily cross the dark region of hell, which is difficult to cross for the issueless. Do not go far in the company of cruel death. Arise, darling, these infant playmates of yours, O prince, are calling you to romp freely. You have slept long and must be seized with hunger. Eat something, suck my breast, and take away the grief of us, your near and dear ones. Having lost good fortune, I could not behold your lotus-like countenance with its innocent smile and cheerful glances. Or taken by cruel death, have you gone to the other world whence you are not going to return? For I no longer hear your sweet words. Sri Shuka resumed. Along with the queen, mourning her departed son through such varied laments, Emperor Chitraketu wailed at the top of his voice, extremely agonized as he was. While the couple were wailing, all those who were devoted to him, men as well as women, wept, and everything was lifeless, as it were. Knowing the king to have lost consciousness due to his having given way to despair, and without a guide, the sage Angira appeared along with Narada. Thus ends the 14th discourse entitled The Lament of Chitraketu in Book 6 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 15, Chitraketu Consoled. Sri Shuka began again. Enlightening by means of wise utterances, King Chitraketu, who was lying by the side of the dead baby, like a dead man, overwhelmed as he was with grief, the sages Angira and Narada spoke. In what relation did the boy whom you are lamenting, O King of Kings, stand to you in a previous birth? What is he to you at present, and what will he be to you hereafter? Again, what were you to him in a former incarnation? What are you at present, and what will you be hereafter? Just as stands part from one another and come together by the current of a stream, so are embodied beings brought together and parted by time. Just as seeds do spring up from seeds, and do not spring up, in other cases, so do living beings prompted by the Lord's Maya evolve from living beings in some cases, and in other cases do not. You and we and all these mobile and immobile creatures belonging to the present time do not really exist even now, just as we did not before birth and shall not be after death, O Chitraketu. It is Prajapati who, though unborn and unconcerned, creates, protects, and destroys living beings as a child through beings evolved by himself and therefore not independent. The body of one embodied being, O king, is evolved from the body of another living being, united with the body of a third embodied being, just as one seed springs up from another seed, while the soul inhabiting all these bodies is eternal, like God, the only reality. The aforesaid distinction of body and soul has existed from eternity and has been conceived through ignorance, even as the distinction of the generic property and the individuality of a thing assumed as inhering in the thing itself. Sri Shuka continued. Thus consoled by the words of the Brahmanas, King Chitraketu wiped his face, withered through mental anguish, with his hand and spoke. The king said, Who are you, rich in wisdom and the most adored of the adorable, that have come here, disguised in the form of ascetics absolutely unconcerned with the world? Indeed, those identified with Brahman, who are beloved of the Lord, go about the earth at will disguised as madmen for admonishing sensually minded people like me. Sanat Kumara, Narada, Ribhu, Angira, Devala, Asita, Apantaratama, Vyasa, Markandeya, and Gautama, Vasishta, the glorious Parashurama, Kapila, Shuka son of Badarayana, Durvasa and Yajnavalkya, Jatukarnya and Aruni, Romasha, Chyavana, Dattatreya, Asuri with Patanjali, the seer Vedashira, the sage Bodhya, Panchashira, Hiranyanabha, Kausalya, Srutadeva, and Rutadvaja. These and other lords of Siddhas range over the earth with the object of imparting wisdom. Therefore, you two are the masters of my stupid self, a sensual brute. Hold aloft the lamp of wisdom to me, plunged in blinding darkness. The sage Angira said, I am Angira, who blessed you with a son when you longed for one, O king. Here is the divine sage Narada, son of the Creator himself. Knowing you, a devotee of Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Person, plunged in despondency, difficult to get through due to grief caused by the loss of your son, though not fit to be drowned in it, we have come down here to shower our grace on you, O Chitraketu. A votary of the Brahmanas and a devotee of the Lord does not deserve to be despondent. I was going to impart the highest wisdom to you even then when I visited your house the first time. Coming to know of your insistence on having something else, I conferred on you a son alone. Now the agony of those blessed with a son is being directly experienced by you. Even so, a wife, house, riches, power, and prosperity of various kinds, sound and the other objects of sense, the fleeting glories of sovereignty, lands, kingdom, army, treasury, dependents, and ministers, and friends, and relations, all these, O ruler of the Shurasena territory, are sources of grief, infatuation, fear, and affliction. They are like an imaginary city seen in the sky, and are of the nature of a dream, illusion, and fancy. They are conceptual, and that they are perceived without reality and disappear. In other words, they're not real in the sense that they're not lasting. The various actions proceed from the mind of a man thinking of such material possessions under the force of tendencies of action. Tendencies of action being vasanas. As a matter of fact, this body, consisting of the gross elements, the senses of perception, and the organs of action, has been spoken of as causing afflictions and agonies of various kinds to the embodied soul who regards it, the body, as his own self. Therefore, investigating with a composed mind the true nature of the self, give up faith in the abiding reality of the objective world and resort to quietism. Narada said, having been purified, receive from me the following sacred text as an abode of the highest blessing. By repeating and fixing your thought on it, you will be able to behold Lord Sankarsana after 7 nights. By resorting to the soles of his feet, O King of Kings, devotees belonging to the past, Lord Shiva, the destroyer of the universe, and others, got rid of the illusion of this world and forthwith attained to his unsurpassed, nay, unequaled greatness, and you too will attain before long the same supreme result. Thus ends the 15th discourse entitled Chitraketu Consoled in Book 6 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 16, Chitraketu realizes the Supreme Spirit. Sri Shukra began again. After that, O Parikshit, the Devarishi, Narada, showed to the sorrowing kinsmen the departed prince, so showed them his spirit, and spoke thus, as the tradition goes. Narada said, O embodied soul, so he's speaking to the soul of the dead baby, may you be blessed. Look at your father and mother. Your kinsmen and relations are deeply agonized with grief caused by you. Entering your body again, and surrounded by your kinsmen, enjoy the luxuries provided by your father for the rest of your life, and ascend the imperial throne. The soul replied, in what incarnation were these people parents to me who have been revolving by force of karma through the species of devas, lower animals, and human beings? Indeed, by turns, all people actually come to be relatives and kinsmen, adversaries and mediators, friends and neutrals, and even bitter enemies in relation to one another. As gold and other commodities pass from one place to another among men, so does an embodied soul pass through wombs and procreants. The relation with men, even of animals like cows, etc., yet living, is indeed perceived to be temporary. The feeling of mindness with respect to such a being really continues only so long as there exists a relation with it. Similarly, a jiva that has found its way into a womb is unrelated with any inasmuch as it is eternal and free from the consciousness of being a son, etc. It is only so long as it is seen related to another that the other jiva can claim it as its own. The jiva is everlasting, free from decay and unmanifest. It is the ground of all and self-illuminating. Being all-powerful, it manifests itself in the form of the universe by means of the gunas of its own maya. Indeed, none is very dear and none unwelcome, none is akin and none alien to it. On the other hand, it is the one witness of the varied minds of friends as well as of foes. In fact, the self earns neither virtue nor sin, nor does it enjoy the fruit of actions, and remains unconcerned, as it were, for it is the witness of both causes and effects, and independent. Sri Shuka continued. Having spoken thus, the spirit disappeared, and struck with wonder, those kinsmen of his then gave up mourning, cutting asunder their ties of affection. After cremating the body and performing the rites appropriate to the occasion, the kinsmen set aside their affection, which is so difficult to get rid of, and which is a source of grief, infatuation, fear, and agony. Remembering the words of the sage Angira, the queens that had brought about the death of the child and had lost their splendor due to child murder felt ashamed and performed penance on the bank of the Yamuna River in that city, this is the city of Mathura, by way of atonement for infanticide, as prescribed by the Brahmanas, O Maharaj. Having thus realized the self through the words of the sages, Emperor Chitraketu rose from the deceptive well of metempsychosis, even as an elephant would from the mire of a lac. The mire, I'm assuming that was meant to be the mire of a lake. Having performed his ablutions in the water of the Yamuna with due ceremony and gone through other sacred rites accomplished with water, and with his senses entirely subdued, he bowed in silence at the feet of the two sons of the Creator. Then the divine sage Narada joyously taught, it is said, the following prayer to that devotee, Chitraketu, who had resorted to him and had fully controlled his mind. Hail to you, the divine Vasudeva presiding over the intellect and denoted by the mystical syllable Om, and obeisance to you as Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarshana. So these are the Chaturvyuha, 4 forms of Vishnu, Vasudeva presiding over the intellect, Pradyumna presiding over reason, Aniruddha presiding over the mind, and Sankarshana presiding over the ego. We contemplate on you. Hail to you who are absolute consciousness and an embodiment of supreme bliss, who revel in your own self and are tranquil, and whose eye is turned away from duality. Hail to you who have kept aloof by the very realization of your blissful character, all disturbances caused by your Maya. Hail to you, the mighty controller of the senses, having the cosmos for your body. May he protect us, he who is absolute consciousness without any name or form, and lies beyond the cause and the effect, and who shines all by himself when speech along with the mind has withdrawn, failing to reach him. Hail to you, the self-same Brahman, in which this universe stays and gets merged, and from which it evolves, and that pervades all even as earth pervades all earthen vessels. In other words, that anything made of clay, the quality of earth pervades them completely because it is the substance of which they are made. Likewise with everything being made of the fundamental substance of Brahman. I bow to that which the organs of action fail to reach, and the mind, intellect, and the senses of perception fail to comprehend, and which extends within and without, like ether. The body, indriyas, vital airs, mind, and intellect. These are stirred into activity only when charged with a ray of the spirit, and not at other times, even as iron, which is not fully heated, cannot burn. And it is Brahman alone that acquires the name of subject during the waking and other states. Hail to Lord Sankarshana, denoted by Om, and possessed of supreme might, the spouse of goddess Mahalakshmi, who embodies in herself the highest glory and fortune. Hail to you, O supreme ruler of the universe, whose lotus-like feet are fondly and softly kneaded by all the hosts of principal devotees with the lotus buds of their hands. Sri Shuka went on. Having taught the aforesaid prayer to that devotee who had sought his protection, the sage Narada returned with the sage Angira, O king, to the abode of the self-born, to Brahmaloka, while Emperor Chitraketu duly repeated that prayer taught by Narada for 7 days with perfect concentration of mind, subsisting on only water. And then at the expiry of 7 nights, the aforesaid king attained the permanent lordship of the Vidyadharas, the artists of heaven, by virtue of the prayer being repeated. After that, in a few days, the course of his mind having been illumined through the same prayer, So he didn't stop at having become permanent lord of the Vidyadharas. He kept going, and betook himself to the feet of Lord Shesha, the serpent god, he adored even of the Devas. He saw the Lord in a form white as a lotus fiber, clad in blue, and adorned with a brilliant diadem, armlets, girdle, and wristlets, marked with a cheerful countenance and reddish eyes, and surrounded by rings of Siddheshvaras, meaning the lords of Siddhas. All his sins having been wiped out by the sight of the Lord, and his mind clear and rid of all impurities, Chitraketu silently approached the most ancient person with intensified devotion. And with tears of love in his eyes and hair standing on end, he bowed to him. Repeatedly wetting the support under the lotus feet of the illustrious Lord with his teardrops of love, and all utterance having been hindered by love, he was not at all able for a long time to extol him properly in a loud voice. Then, having composed his mind by dint of reason, and restrained the outgoing tendency of all his senses, he recovered his faculty of speech and addressed in the following words that Guru of the universe, whose body stands described in scriptures such as the Pancharatra treating of devotion. Chitraketu said, O unconquerable Lord, you stand conquered by the righteous that have subdued their self and are possessed of an unruffled mind. And they too are conquered by you, you who bestow your very self on those that adore you in a disinterested spirit, exceedingly compassionate as you are. Adore you in a disinterested spirit, meaning have devotion to you for the sake of the devotion itself, not for some ulterior desire. The evolution, maintenance, and dissolution, etc., of the universe, O Lord, are, as a matter of fact, a sport on your part. The creators of the universe are parts of the cosmic being, yet in vain do they try to outshine one another due to the consciousness of there being an independent Lord. You exist before the atom and at the end of the infinite universe. In other words, that you are essentially smallest than the smallest and larger than the largest. He's paraphrasing an Upanishadic Mahavakya. And likewise pervade the intermediate stages, while you are without beginning, middle, or end. That which is constant at the beginning as well as at the end of phenomenal existences is constant in the middle too. This egg-shaped universe, which further resembles a bud inasmuch as it is enveloped, they say, by 7 sheaths in the shape of earth, etc., each outer sheath, meaning of the subtle elements, each outer sheath being 10 times thicker than the one enclosed by it, is swimming within you like an atom, along with countless millions of other similar eggs, meaning countless millions of other universes. Hence, you are infinite. They are brutes in human form who, in their thirst for the pleasures of sense, worship the Devas, but not you, the Supreme. The blessings enjoyed by them, O Lord, perish after those Devas, even as the blessings enjoyed by the dependents of a royal house come to an end after the extinction of that house. Since the Devas themselves have finite lifespans, 36,000 years for the average, longer for the great Trayasrinchata Devas like Indra and so on, but still a finite period of time. Entreaties made to you, who are possessed of a body which is all consciousness and not a product of the 3 gunas, even for the pleasures of sense, O Supreme Lord, do not make for rebirth any more than fried seeds put forth shoots. For pairs of opposites proceed from the 3 gunas. You surpass all on such occasions, O unconquerable Lord, when you preach the flawless Bhagavata Dharma, which even sages reveling in the self and having nothing to call their own resort to for loving devotion to the Lord. Differential notions such as I and you, mine and yours, do not disturb men treading on this path as they do in the case of other cults. A ritual act which is performed by one having a differential outlook is indeed impure, yields a perishable fruit, and is fraught with sin. What good can be expected either to oneself or to another, and what object can be gained through a ritual which is harmful to one's own self as well as to others? On the other hand, pain is inflicted on you through self-mortification. And sin is also incurred through persecution of another. because whatever, if you cause yourself to suffer or if you cause someone else to suffer, you are causing Brahman to suffer, because there is nothing other than Brahman. All experience is Brahman's experience on some level, is the point he's making. Your point of view, with which, as a matter of fact, you preached the cult of devotion, the cult which is exclusively followed by the worthy who regard the multitudes of living beings, both mobile and immobile, as their very self, is never belied. It is not at all impossible, O Lord, that all the sins of men should be wiped out by your sight, when even an outcast is freed from birth and death by hearing your name just once. Therefore, O Lord, we now have the impurities of our heart wiped off by your sight. By your darshan is the word being translated. How could that which was predicated by the Deva Rishi Narada, your devotee, be otherwise? All that is done by the people in this world, O infinite Lord, is known to you, the soul of the universe. There is nothing in particular to be revealed to you, the supreme Guru, just as there is nothing to be shown to the sun by fireflies. Hail to you, the Almighty God, the controller of the creation, maintenance, and dissolution of the universe, the purest of the pure, whose true nature cannot easily be understood by the sensually minded strivers due to their notion of difference. The creators of the universe are active when you are active. The senses of perception are able to perceive their objects when you are disposed to perceive. The terrestrial globe appears on one of your heads like a mustard seed. Obeisance be to you, that Lord with 1,000 heads. Sri Shuka went on. Duly extolled in this way and pleased, Lord Ananta spoke to the said Chitraketu, the chief of the Vidyadharas, O scion of Kuru. The Lord said, you have fully achieved your purpose through the instruction which was given to you by the sages Narada at Angira about me and the prayer, as well as by my darshan. In fact, all created beings are I. Nay, I am the self as well as the creator of living beings. The Veda and the transcendent reality both are my eternal bodies. A man should recognize his own self as extending through the universe and the universe as comprised in his own self. Nay, he should regard both as pervaded by me, and even so both as conceived in me. As a man dreams himself as fast asleep and perceives in another dream, forming part of the first dream, the world within himself, and on waking from the dream, visualizes himself as lying in a part of a room, so realizing awakeness and the other states of the mind as mere products of the Maya of the self, one should fix one's mind on the Supreme Spirit, the witness of these states. Know me to be that transcendental reality, the self, identified with which an embodied soul, fast asleep, is conscious of its deep sleep at that time, as well as of the supersensuous gratification, meaning the gratification, the enjoyment of being deeply asleep, even though none of the senses are giving feedback. The consciousness that runs through deep sleep as well as through awakeness and continues beyond the two in the case of the jiva that is aware of both is that transcendental Brahman. If the aforesaid Brahman, which is my own essence, is forgotten by the jiva, it comes to be viewed as different from the self. And from this follows mundane existence of the soul, which consists in passing from one body to another and undergoing one death after another. He who fails to realize his own essential nature after attaining here the human species, where one can hope to acquire knowledge and wisdom, can get no peace of mind anywhere. Remembering the hardship in worldly endeavor and the contrary results following from such an endeavor, and even so the fearlessness consequent on the withdrawal from worldly activity, a wise man should cease from volition in regard to such activity. A husband and wife undertake activities for happiness and for freedom from suffering. From such activities ensues neither sensation of suffering nor attainment of happiness. Thus, perceiving the contrary results met with by men who think themselves clever, and realizing the subtle nature of the self, which transcends the three states of the mind, nay, rid of the pleasures of sense, both of this world and of the next, through one's faculty of discrimination, and contented with one's knowledge and wisdom, one should cultivate devotion to me. To realize the oneness of the Supreme Spirit in the individual soul, That is the sole interest deserving to be known by every means by men whose intellect has acquired acuteness through concentration. Carefully bearing in mind and acting up to this exhortation of mine with reverence, O Chitraketu, you will soon acquire knowledge and wisdom and attain perfection. Sri Shuka continued, having reassured Chitraketu in this way, Lord Sri Hari, who is not only the Guru of the world but the soul of the universe, disappeared from that place while Chitraketu stood looking on. Thus ends the 16th discourse entitled Chitraketu Realizes the Supreme Spirit in Book 6 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 17, Chitraketu Cursed. Sri Shuka began again. Having made obeisance to the quarter in which Lord Ananta had disappeared, meaning in the direction where he had been before he disappeared, Chitraketu, the Vidyadhara, since he has now become a Vidyadhara through his sadhana, went about flying in the air, having fun with his new powers. Panegyrized by sages, that means sung about in praise, by sages, siddhas, and charanas, and getting Vidyadhara women to sing praises of Lord Sri Hari, that eminent yogi sported for 10,000 million years. So in other words, 10 billion years in the valleys of Mount Sumeru, where one realizes the various objects of one's desire, his strength and organic power not diminished by time. On one occasion, while flying in a resplendent aerial car bestowed on him by Lord Vishnu, he beheld Lord Shiva, who dwells on Mount Kailasa, surrounded by siddhas and charanas, having folded in his arm his divine spouse, goddess Parvati, seated on his lap in an assembly of sages. Going near them, Chitraketu laughed loudly and spoke within the hearing of the goddess. Chitraketu said, "Here sits the Guru of the universe himself, the chief figure in this assembly, engaged in expounding righteousness to embodied beings, yet actually embracing his consort in open assembly. Wearing matted locks and practicing severe austerities, the head of assemblies of Brahmavadis, which means expositors of the Vedas, he sits hugging a woman shamelessly like an uncultured person. Even rustics ordinarily embrace a woman only in seclusion, while this god who has undertaken solemn religious vows is clasping his spouse in an open assembly." Sri Shuka went on. Even on hearing these remarks, Lord Shiva, whose mind is too deep to be fathomed, heartily laughed, O Parikshit, and otherwise kept quiet. And so did the worthies present in the assembly, who were devoted to him. While Chitraketu, who was ignorant of Lord Shiva's greatness, was thus uttering much that was unbecoming of him, Goddess Parvati spoke in anger to that impudent Vidyadhara, who apparently regarded himself as one that had subdued oneself, but in fact he had not. Goddess Parvati said, "Is this fellow the Lord now ruling over the world and wielding the rod of punishment and competent to treat with disrespect wicked and shameless people like us? Surely neither the lotus-born creator nor the sons of Brahma, Brighu, Narada, and so on, nor indeed the sage Sanat Kumara, Lord Kapila, and Swayambhuva Manu know dharma, for they do not prohibit Lord Shiva, the destroyer of the universe, from violating dharma. This fellow surely deserves to be punished inasmuch as he, a vile kshatriya, is impudent enough to insult sages and teach the Guru of the universe himself, whose lotus feet are worthy of being contemplated on by the aforementioned, nay, who is the most auspicious of the auspicious. This self-conceited and arrogant fellow is not fit to resort to the soles of feet of Lord Vishnu, the very act of approaching which is esteemed by the virtuous. Hence be reborn in the demon species, a most wicked species, O evil-minded one, so that you may not perpetrate again in this world such offense against the exalted souls, my son." Sri Shuka resumed. Thus subjugated to an execration, the said Chitraketu alighted from his aerial vimana and propitiated the noble lady, goddess Parvati, with his head bent low, O scion of Bharata. Chitraketu said, "I accept your imprecation as a welcome and loving gift from you, with my palms joined together, O mother. For whatever is pronounced by divinities with reverence to a mortal is undoubtedly that which was predestined for him. Deluded by ignorance and revolving in this whirligig of mundane existence, an embodied soul experiences joy and sorrow everywhere at every time. Neither oneself nor anyone else is responsible for joy and sorrow. A fool alone holds himself as well as another responsible for them. In this world of matter, what distinction is there between an imprecation and a blessing, heaven and hell, or even joy and sorrow? The one Lord brings forth living beings by his own Maya and ordains their bondage and liberation, as well as their happiness and misery, though free from bondage himself. To him who is alike to all and free from attachment, none is dear or hateful, none is a kinsman or relation, and none is his own or alien. He has no love for pleasure. How then can there be anger in him? Yet action, which flows from his energy, conduces to the joy and sorrow, welfare and injury, bondage and liberation, birth and death, and the circuit of worldly life of embodied souls. Hence, I do not propitiate you with a view to being rid of your imprecation, O noble lady. Only be pleased to forgive what you consider as unjustly said by me, O virtuous lady. Sri Shuka resumed, having thus appeased Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati, who have their abode on Mount Kailasa, O chastiser of foes, Chitraketu went his way by his aerial Vimana, while the aforesaid couple looked on wondering. Thereupon, Lord Rudra spoke as follows to his spouse, Goddess Parvati, within the hearing of the gods and sages, asuras and siddhas, as well as of his attendants. Sri Rudra said, "You have seen, O fair one, the glory of the high-souled servants of Lord Sri Hari of marvelous deeds, who are free from craving. All those who are devoted to Lord Narayana have no fear from any quarter whatsoever, for they find the same use for heaven, for final moksha, or even for the infernal regions. It is through the deluding potency of God that souls are invested with a body, and it is due to their connection with a body that pairs of opposites, such as joy and sorrow, life and death, execration and benediction, are experienced by embodied souls. The notion of desirability and otherwise, too, is really the outcome of a man's ignorance, just like the distinction of pleasurable and painful experiences, etc., with reference to one's own self, and has been precisely conceived as the notion of a snake, etc., with reference to a wreath of flowers. There he's referencing a well-known Upanishadic teaching. There is no object in this world worth resorting to in particular for men cherishing devotion to Lord Vasudeva and equipped with the strength of wisdom and dispassion. Neither myself, nor the Creator, Brahma, nor the sages Sanat Kumara and Narada, nor even the other sages begotten by Brahma, nor the rulers of Devas know his intention. Much less can those accounting themselves independent lords, though mere parts of his partial manifestations, know his nature. None indeed is dear and none hateful to him, none is his own and none alien to him either. Being the very self of all living beings, Sri Hari is the beloved of all creatures. And this highly blessed Chitraketu is his beloved servant, looking on all with the same eye and tranquil. And indeed, I too am a devotee of the immortal Lord. Therefore, you should have no wonder in regard to high-souled men who are devotees of the Supreme Person and tranquil, and who view all with the same eye." Sri Shuka went on hearing this speech of Lord Shiva, Goddess Uma, O king, was freed from astonishment and felt pacified in mind. Though fully capable of pronouncing a counter-curse, Chitraketu accepted the curse of the Divine Lady with reverence. Such is the characteristic of a pious soul. Hurled into the demoniac species, he sprang up from the sacred fire called Dakshinagni of the god Tvashta and became known as Vrutra, endowed with spiritual knowledge and wisdom. I have thus told you all that you inquired of me, the cause of Vrutra's birth as a demon and what accounted for his devotion to the Lord. By listening to this sacred episode of the high-souled Chitraketu, revealing the glory of the votaries of Lord Vishnu, one is completely rid of bondage. Rising in the morning, he who recites this episode with reverence, remaining silent, otherwise, and remembering Sri Hari, attains the supreme goal. Thus ends the 17th discourse entitled Chitraketu Cursed in Book 6 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. I'm thinking of maybe stopping there for today. It's slightly shorter than we often go, but that was very much a self-contained story, the story of Chitraketu. And now the Bhagavatam changes subject and gets into other things. So it feels like a good breaking point. So yeah,
Thank you, Devala. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all. So yeah, that's the backstory of Vritra and the explanation of how Vritra was expounding such devotion, which seemed uncharacteristic of a demon in the last story from last week.
It's so interesting that we know so much from our intellect and we gather so much information, but when you read the Bhagavatam, all gets transcended. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you all for coming. I do have something later this morning that I kind of have to get to, so I can't. Normally, I'm happy to hang around and talk and answer questions and such, but I do kind of have to run today. So, yeah, thank you all for coming. Jai Shri Krishna.